In 1961, a woman in Nebraska could feed 6 people for 11 cents a head with a dish you have never heard of. Every state had one. A food so ordinary, nobody wrote it down, so cheap, nobody bragged about it, and so good that people who grew up on it still talk about it 50 years later. Number 27 was carried into coal mines in a lunch pail. Number 3 was invented by farm wives who could not afford eggs. Number 1 fed more American families than any restaurant ever has. Hit subscribe. Let us count down. Number 50, Alaska, sourdough hotcakes. Before Alaska was a state, it was a place where a crock of sourdough starter mattered more than a rifle. Prospectors who came north in 1898 slept with their starter inside their coats so the wild yeast would not freeze, and the men who kept theirs alive through a winter earned a nickname that stuck for a century. They were called sourdoughs. The hotcakes came out of that crock every single morning. A cup of bubbling starter, a spoon of sugar, a pinch of soda to cut the sour, and a hot griddle greased with bacon fat. They cooked up thin at the edges, tangy, almost yeasty, nothing like the sweet cake-flavored pancakes that came later in a box. Poured over with canned syrup or a spoonful of berry jam put up in August. Some Alaskan families kept starters that were older than the state itself, passed from a grandfather's cabin to a daughter's kitchen in Anchorage. When Bisquick arrived, the crocks went in the trash. The yeast that survived the Klondike could not survive convenience. Number 49, Hawaii, Saimin. Long before instant ramen sat in every college dorm, Hawaii had saimin, and it was not Japanese, not Chinese, not Filipino. It was all of them at once. Plantation workers from a dozen countries shared a camp kitchen, and out of that came a bowl of soft wheat noodles in a clear shrimp and kombu dashi, topped with sliced green onion, a strip of pink and white kamaboko fish cake, and a few ribbons of scrambled egg or Spam. That was it. It cost almost nothing because the broth was made from dried shrimp and scraps. Cane workers ate it before dawn. Kids ate it after school for a quarter at a corner stand. Even McDonald's in Hawaii put saimin on the menu, and it stayed there for decades because locals would have rioted otherwise. The broth was the whole art. Light, clean, faintly sweet, tasting of the ocean without tasting like fish. Nobody makes it from scratch anymore. They tear open a packet and call it the same thing. It is not. Number 48, Nevada, Basque boarding house, lamb stew. Everybody thinks Nevada food means a casino buffet. The real Nevada food came from a boarding house in Winnemucca with a long table and no menu. Basque sheep herders came over from the Pyrenees in the 1800s to run flocks across the high desert, and the boarding houses that fed them served one thing at one time to whoever sat down. The centerpiece was lamb stew. Cheap shoulder cuts, the parts nobody wanted, browned hard in a heavy pot, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, potatoes, carrots, and a can of tomatoes until the meat surrendered and the broth went thick and red. Bread came out in whole loaves. Wine came in a pitcher. You passed everything to your left, and you did not ask what it cost because it was $1.50 and it never changed. Herders ate it after 3 months alone in the mountains. It was the first food they had eaten sitting down in a room with other human beings. That is what it tasted like. Number 47, Wyoming, choke cherry syrup. Choke cherries grow wild along creek beds all through Wyoming, and they are almost inedible raw. Bite one and your whole mouth puckers shut, which is exactly how the fruit got its name. But Wyoming families picked them by the bucket every August anyway, because cooked down with sugar, they turned into something remarkable. The berries went into a pot with just enough water to cover, simmered until they burst, then strained through a cloth flour sack hung from a cupboard handle overnight. You did not squeeze the bag. Squeezing made it cloudy, and a woman whose choke cherry jelly came out cloudy heard about it at church. What dripped through was a dark garnet juice that got boiled with sugar into syrup or set with pectin into jelly. It went over hot cakes, over biscuits, over ice cream, over anything. A quart of syrup cost you nothing but a scratched arm and an afternoon. Grocery stores never sold it because you cannot farm a choke cherry profitably, so it vanished from everywhere except back roads and grandmothers. Number 46, Montana, the Butte Pasty. Butte, Montana was the richest hill on earth, and the men who dug the copper out of it came from Cornwall, England. They brought a lunch with them. A pasty is a half-moon of lard crust folded around diced beef, potato, onion, and rutabaga, crimped along the edge into a thick rope of pastry, and baked until the crust turned hard and golden. That crimped edge was not decoration. It was a handle. A miner with hands black with arsenic and copper dust could hold the pasty by the crimp, eat the rest, and throw the dirty edge away. Legend in Butte says they left it for the Tommyknockers, the spirits in the mine. The pasty stayed warm for hours in a lunch pail set on a hot rock, and one of them, about a pound of food for a nickel, held a man through a 10-hour shift a mile underground. Butte still has pasty shops. Everywhere else in America, this thing has been forgotten completely, which is a shame, because it is the best lunch ever engineered. Number 45, Idaho, finger steaks. Everybody knows Idaho for potatoes. Almost nobody outside Idaho knows about finger steaks, and that is a genuine loss. A restaurant owner in Boise named Milo Bybee started cutting cheap sirloin tips into strips in the late 1950s, dredging them in seasoned flour and buttermilk batter, and dropping them into a deep fryer. What came out looked like chicken fingers and tasted like a steakhouse. The batter went crackling gold. The inside stayed pink and juicy because the strips were thin enough to cook in 90 seconds. They cost almost nothing to make because the whole point was using the tough end cuts a butcher could not sell. Served in a plastic basket with a paper liner and a little cup of fry sauce, which is another Idaho thing, ketchup and mayonnaise stirred together in a ratio every family argued about. Kids ordered them at every drive-in from Boise to Twin Falls. They never crossed the state line. Ask for finger steaks in Ohio and you will get a blank stare. Number 44, North Dakota Knofla soup. Germans from Russia settled North Dakota in the 1880s, and they brought a soup that is basically flour, potatoes, milk, and stubbornness. Knofla are little dumplings, and calling them dumplings makes them sound fancier than they are. You mix flour, an egg, a splash of milk, and salt into a stiff dough, roll it into ropes, and cut it into pieces the size of a thumbnail with a knife or a pair of kitchen scissors held straight over the pot. They fall into simmering broth with diced potatoes and onion, and the flour they carry thickens the whole thing into something between a soup and a paste. A pour of cream at the end, if there was cream. That is the entire recipe. It cost pennies. It fed a threshing crew. And on a January night in Bismarck, when the wind comes across the plains at 40 below, a bowl of Knofla does something to a person that no restaurant food has ever managed. Church basements in North Dakota still serve it. Nobody else has heard of it. Number 43, South Dakota, chislic. Chislic is cubes of red meat on a stick, deep fried or grilled, salted hard, and served with saltine crackers. That is it. That is the whole dish. And South Dakota loves it so much, the legislature made it the official state nosh in 2018. The meat was mutton originally because a German-Russian immigrant named John Hoelwarth brought the idea over from the Crimea in the 1870s, and mutton was what he had. Later it became beef sirloin, or venison, or lamb. The cubes go into hot oil for about 90 seconds, come out crusted brown outside and rare inside, get hit with garlic salt while they are still spitting, and land on a paper plate with crackers to soak the grease. You eat them with your fingers off a toothpick. Bars in Freeman and Yankton and Sioux Falls sold them by the basket for $1. It is not sophisticated. It is not photogenic. It is one of the best ways human beings have ever found to eat a piece of tough meat. Number 42. Nebraska, the runza. A runza is a rectangle of soft bread dough baked around ground beef, cabbage, and onion. Volga German immigrants brought it to the Nebraska plains, where the wheat grew and the cabbage kept all winter in a cellar, and the beef was whatever the butcher had. The genius was portability and thrift. 1 pound of ground beef and 1 head of cabbage made 8 runzas, which meant a farm wife fed her whole family a hot meat sandwich for about $1.50. The cabbage cooked down to nothing and disappeared into the beef, but it did the work, adding sweetness and bulk and moisture so the filling never went dry. The dough sealed everything inside, so a runza stayed hot in a coat pocket through a 2-mile walk to school in February. A family in Lincoln turned it into a restaurant chain in 1949, and it is still there. But the homemade version, the one that came out of a farmhouse oven 12 at a time on a Saturday, is close to gone. Number 41. Kansas skillet fried chicken with cream gravy. Kansas fried chicken was not the fast food kind, and it was not the deep fryer kind. It was a cast iron skillet, a 1/4 inch of lard, and a bird that had stopped laying. That was the whole system. The chicken got cut into pieces, soaked in salted water or buttermilk, dredged in nothing but seasoned flour, and laid skin down in the hot fat with a lid clapped over the top. The lid was the trick. It trapped steam and cooked the chicken through while the bottom crusted, and then it came off for the last 10 minutes so the skin went brittle. When the chicken was out, you poured off most of the fat, left the brown bits, stirred in flour and then milk, and made cream gravy right in that same pan. A hotel in Brookville served this exact meal family style with mashed potatoes and creamed corn from 1915 onward, and people drove 200 miles for it. Nobody makes it at home now. We buy a bucket. Number 40, Oklahoma, the fried onion burger. This is a Great Depression invention, and you can taste the desperation in it in the best possible way. In 1926, a stand in El Reno, Oklahoma, figured out that beef cost money and onions did not. So they took a 5-cent hamburger and stretched it. A ball of ground beef went on a hot flat top, then a fistful of paper-thin sliced onions went on top of the ball, and the whole thing got smashed flat with a spatula so the onions drove straight down into the meat. As it cooked, the onions gave up their water, steamed the patty, then started to caramelize into the crust. You flipped it, the onion side hit the steel and fried into a brown lace, and you slapped a bun on top to steam. Half a burger's worth of beef made a whole burger's worth of food. Here's the part nobody expected. It tastes better than a plain burger, sweeter, deeper, juicier. Onion-heavy poverty cooking accidentally produced one of the great American sandwiches. Number 39, Arkansas, chocolate gravy. The first time somebody tells you about chocolate gravy, you assume they are making it up. They are not. In the Ozarks, across Arkansas and into Missouri and Tennessee, this was Saturday morning. Cocoa powder, sugar, and flour whisked together dry in a skillet, then milk poured in slowly and stirred over low heat until it thickened into something between a pudding and a sauce, finished with a lump of butter. It went over hot split biscuits, and the biscuits soaked it up and went soft on the bottom while the top stayed crisp. That was breakfast. A can of cocoa cost a dime and lasted for months, and this was how a mother made a poor kitchen feel like a bakery on a morning when there was no bacon and no eggs and no money. Grown men from Arkansas will get quiet talking about this. It was not a dessert. It was a Saturday. It was the one morning of the week that was allowed to be sweet, and it cost almost nothing. First pattern break. Here is what nobody tells you about regional American food. It did not come from chefs. It came from what would grow, what would keep, and who got off the boat. Cabbage in Nebraska because Volga Germans farmed wheat and cabbage. Rice in South Carolina because of the tidal flats and the West Africans who knew how to work them. Sourdough in Alaska because commercial yeast dies at 40 below. Every dish on this list is a map of a landscape and a migration written in food instead of ink. And then, starting around 1955, something flattened all of it. Interstate highways, freezer trucks, national grocery chains, television advertising that ran the same commercial in Maine and Arizona on the same night. For the first time in human history, a country decided what it wanted for dinner all at once. What we gained was convenience. What we lost was 200 years of local intelligence about how to eat well on nothing. These 50 dishes are what is left of it. Number 38. Missouri, gooey. Butter cake. This is a mistake that became a legend. Sometime in the 1930s, a German baker on the south side of St. Louis reversed the proportions on a coffee cake, putting in far too much butter and not nearly enough flour. What came out of the oven should have been thrown away. It did not rise. The center sank and stayed wet, sitting on the crust like a layer of sweet custard, and the top cracked into a thin sugar shell dusted with powdered sugar. It was technically a failure, but it was the Depression, and you did not throw away a pan of anything, so he sold it. People lost their minds over it. The texture is the point. The bottom is a yeast dough that goes chewy, the middle is barely set and almost gooey enough to drink, and the whole thing costs pennies because it is mostly butter, sugar, and flour. Every bakery in St. Louis made a version. Every family had a shortcut using a cake mix and cream cheese. Outside Missouri, almost nobody knows it exists. Number 37. Iowa, the loose meat sandwich. An Iowa loose meat sandwich is a hamburger that gave up on holding together, and that was the whole idea. A butcher in Muscatine started it in 1926, and it spread across Iowa like a rumor. Ground beef goes into a pan with a little water or broth, gets broken apart with a spoon while it steams and browns, and never gets pressed into a patty at all. It stays crumbled, seasoned with nothing more ambitious than salt, pepper, and onion. Then it gets scooped onto a soft bun with mustard, pickles, and chopped raw onion, and handed over with a spoon, because half of it is going to fall out, and you are supposed to eat that part too. The reason it existed is arithmetic. Loose meat spreads further than a patty. A pound of beef made 5 sandwiches instead of 3. Diners in Sioux City and Des Moines built entire businesses on it and sold it for a dime through the 1950s. Roseanne put one on television, and America still did not catch on. Number 36. Minnesota, tater tot hottish. Do not call it a casserole in Minnesota. It is a hottish, one word, and the difference matters to people there in a way that outsiders find funny and Minnesotans do not. The formula is fixed: a starch, a protein, a binder, and a topping. In its most famous form, that means ground beef browned with onion, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of green beans or corn, all spread in a 9 by 13 pan and covered with a solid ceiling of frozen tater tots laid out in rows, tot by tot, like bricks. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit until the top goes gold and crisp. That is it. It appeared in Lutheran church cookbooks starting in the 1930s, and by the 1950s, it was the entire social infrastructure of the upper Midwest. Funeral? Hottish. New baby? Hottish. Blizzard? Hottish. It cost under $2 and fed 8, and it required no skill, no timing, and no attention, which is exactly why a woman with 4 kids could make it. Number 35, Wisconsin, booyah. Booyah is a stew, but calling it a stew is like calling a wedding a party. In northeast Wisconsin, around Green Bay, Belgian immigrants brought a communal soup tradition that turned into something enormous. Booyah is cooked outdoors in a kettle that holds anywhere from 50 to 500 gallons over a wood fire, stirred with an oar. It takes 2 days. Chickens, beef shanks, oxtails, and pork all go in the night before and simmer until they fall off the bone. Then in the morning comes everything else: potatoes, carrots, cabbage, onions, peas, corn, rutabaga, tomatoes, whatever the parish has. By afternoon, it has cooked down into a thick golden stew where no single ingredient is identifiable anymore. Churches and fire departments made booyah to raise money, and people brought their own pots and pails to carry it home. $2 a gallon. The men who ran the kettles were called booyah masters, and the title was inherited. There is no restaurant version. It cannot exist small. Number 34, Michigan, the Detroit Coney. A coney is not from Coney Island, and the men who made it famous in Detroit were Greek and Macedonian immigrants who arrived around 1917 and opened 2 restaurants next door to each other that have been feuding ever since. The construction never varies. A natural casing beef and pork hot dog, grilled until the skin snaps. A steamed bun. A ladle of chili that is not really chili. A loose, fine-ground, almost soupy beef sauce built with beef heart in the old versions and seasoned with cumin and paprika. Then, yellow mustard in a stripe and a heap of diced raw onion on top. You eat it with a fork, or you accept your fate. Auto workers ate 2 of these, standing up for 30 cents, and went back to the line. It was fast, hot, and dense enough to hold a man through a shift. The chili was the secret, and every family that made it kept the recipe in their head and refused to write it down. Some of those recipes died with them. Number 33, Illinois, the Springfield horseshoe. The horseshoe sandwich is either the most American food ever created or a public health incident, depending on your point of view. It was invented at a hotel in Springfield, Illinois in 1928, and it is built in layers in a specific order on a plate, never in a hand. 2 slices of thick toast go down first, then a piece of meat, originally ham, later hamburger patties or fried chicken or whatever the kitchen had. Then a mountain of French fries piled on top of the meat. Then, over the entire thing, a ladle of cheese sauce made with a roux, sharp cheddar, beer, and a shake of Worcestershire. The original was served on a hot metal plate with the fries arranged to look like horseshoe nails. A half order, 1 slice of toast, is called a pony shoe, which is the only concession anyone in Springfield has ever made to moderation. It cost about 75 cents in 1955, and it was enormous. It has never spread more than about 80 miles from where it was born. Number 32, Indiana, the breaded pork tenderloin. Take a pork loin cutlet. Now beat it with a mallet until it is the size of a dinner plate and about as thick as a magazine. Bread it in cracker crumbs or seasoned flour Fry it in an inch of oil until it goes deep amber and blisters, and serve it on a hamburger bun that is somewhere around 1/3 of its diameter. That absurd overhang is the whole identity of the sandwich. In Indiana, a tenderloin that fits on the bun is considered a failure and possibly an insult. The reason for the size is depression logic. Pounding the cutlet thin turned 3 ounces of pork into a sandwich that looked like a pound of food. Restaurants in Huntington claim the origin around 1908, and by the 1950s, every county fair, every roadside diner, every bowling alley in Indiana had one for under 50 cents. It comes with mustard, pickle, and onion, and nothing else, because anything else would be showing off. Cross into Ohio, and it disappears. Number 31. Ohio. Johnny Marzetti. Every Ohio kid born before 1980 ate this, and most of them do not know it was named after a real person. Teresa Marzetti ran a restaurant in Columbus starting in 1896 and named this dish after her brother-in-law, John. Ground beef and onion browned in a pan, a can of tomato sauce, cooked elbow macaroni, and a pile of shredded cheddar all mixed together, dumped in a pan, topped with more cheese, and baked until it bubbled. That is the entire thing. It cost under $1 and fed 8 people, which is exactly why school cafeterias across Ohio and Indiana adopted it wholesale. Millions of children ate Johnny Marzetti on a compartment tray with a carton of milk and a canned peach half, and never knew they were eating a restaurant dish from Columbus. Church basements made it in roasting pans. Mothers made it on Wednesdays. The Marzetti name survives on salad dressing bottles in the refrigerated aisle, and almost nobody connects the two. The dish itself has quietly evaporated. Here is the part the food industry would rather you not sit with. Look at what these dishes are made of: cabbage, dried beans, cornmeal, organ meat, day-old bread, onions, a ham bone. There is no brand on any of it. There is no margin on any of it. You cannot build a marketing campaign around a rutabaga. So when television arrived in American living rooms in the 1950s, the food that got advertised was the food that had a profit in it. Cake mix, canned soup, frozen dinners, cereal. And the advertising did not just sell products, it sold a feeling that the old way was drudgery and the new way was freedom. Women who made knofla from scratch were told they were working too hard. Women who made hottish from 3 cans were told they were modern. Within 1 generation, the recipes stopped moving from mother to daughter, and a body of knowledge 2 centuries deep just stopped being transmitted. It was not stolen. It was advertised out of existence. Number 30, Kentucky. Burgoo. Burgoo is what happens when a whole county cooks together. It is a stew made outdoors in an iron kettle, and the traditional rule was that it contained whatever anyone brought. That meant mutton, chicken, and pork at minimum. And in the older versions, squirrel, possum, or venison, whatever came out of the woods that week. Then corn, lima beans, okra, potatoes, cabbage, tomatoes, and onions, all of it simmering for 8 to 12 hours until nothing was recognizable and the whole kettle turned into a thick brown mass that would hold a paddle upright. The old-timers said burgoo was done when the spoon stood up on its own. It fed political rallies, church picnics, and the crowd at Keeneland on race weekends. A man called the Burgoo Master ran the kettle, and his reputation was a real thing in a Kentucky town. It cost almost nothing per person because everyone contributed, and it was functionally a potluck that got cooked instead of arranged on a table. That distinction is the entire soul of it. Number 29, Tennessee, apple stack cake. You could not afford a wedding cake in the Appalachians in 1930. So the community made one, and the way they did it tells you everything about how those people lived. A stack cake is 6 to 12 thin layers of a stiff, barely sweet sorghum molasses dough, each one baked in a cast iron skillet and coming out more like a hard cookie than a cake. Between every layer goes a thick paste of dried apples that have been stewed all day with sugar and cinnamon. Then, and this is the crucial part, the whole thing has to sit for at least a day, sometimes 3. The moisture from the apples migrates into the dry layers and softens them into cake. Time is the ingredient. At a mountain wedding, guests each brought a layer, and the bride's family supplied the apples, so a girl's popularity was measured by how tall her cake got. No refrigeration, no butter, no eggs to speak of, no oven required beyond a skillet. Almost nobody has made one in 50 years. Number 28, West Virginia, the pepperoni roll. In 1927, an Italian immigrant baker in Fairmont, West Virginia, named Giuseppe Argiro, looked at the coal miners buying his bread and solved a problem. Miners carried bread and a stick of pepperoni into the mine separately, so he baked them together. Soft white bread dough wrapped around 2 or 3 sticks of pepperoni, baked until the crust goes gold and the pepperoni inside renders, leaking its orange fat into the bread. It needs no refrigeration. It needs no reheating. It is fine 8 hours later in a lunch bucket in a mine 2,000 feet down, and the fat that's soaked into the crumb is what makes it taste incredible cold. It cost a nickel. It kept a man working. Every gas station, every bakery, every school bake sale in West Virginia sells them to this day, and the state legislature has fought over the official recipe. 20 miles over the state line, nobody knows what you are talking about. This is possibly the most perfect working lunch ever devised, and it is trapped inside one state. Number 27, Virginia, peanut soup. This sounds like a novelty. It is not. Peanut soup is one of the oldest continuously cooked dishes in America, brought here by enslaved West Africans who had been making groundnut stews for centuries, and it took root in Virginia because Virginia is where the peanuts grew. The colonial version is deceptively refined. Onion and celery sweated in butter, flour stirred in to make a roux, chicken stock whisked in, and then a cup of smooth peanut butter or ground roasted peanuts beaten in until the whole thing goes silky and pale tan. A hit of cream, a shake of pepper, chopped peanuts scattered on top. It is savory, not sweet. It coats the spoon. It tastes rich in a way that makes no sense given the ingredient list. It has been on the menu at a tavern in Williamsburg for generations, and it was on farm tables all over southeastern Virginia because peanuts were the cheapest protein in the state. We turned peanuts into a lunchbox sandwich and forgot they could be dinner. Number 26, North Carolina, liver mush. The name is not doing this food any favors, and that is exactly why it is dying. Liver mush is a Pennsylvania Dutch idea that moved south and settled into the western Piedmont of North Carolina, around Shelby and Marion and Lincolnton. Pork liver and pig head parts get boiled until tender, ground fine, mixed back into their own broth with cornmeal and sage and black pepper, and poured into loaf pans to set overnight into a firm gray block. In the morning, you slice it a half-inch thick and fry it hard in a skillet until the outside forms a dark, crackling crust, and the inside goes soft and creamy. It goes on white bread with mustard or grape jelly, and people will fight about which. A pound cost about 20 cents and delivered more iron and B12 than a steak. Shelby holds a liver mush festival. Outside those few counties, it has simply ceased to exist because we decided that eating the whole animal was something to be embarrassed about. Number 25, South Carolina, chicken bog. Chicken bog is a rice dish from the PD region, and the name comes from the texture. The rice is meant to be bogged down, wet and loose, not fluffy and separate. It is not a pilau, and locals will correct you on that with some heat. You simmer a whole cut-up chicken in water with an onion until the meat falls off. You pull the meat, keep every drop of the broth, and cook rice directly in that broth with sliced smoked sausage until the rice drinks all of it and swells. Then the chicken goes back in, and the whole pot gets stirred together with black pepper. That is it. No vegetables, no color, nothing green. It is the most beige food imaginable, and it is glorious. 1 chicken and 2 cups of rice fed 12 people, which is why it was the standard dish for a fish fry, a political rally, a family reunion. Loris, South Carolina, holds a bog festival every October. 50 miles inland, it is unknown. Number 24, Georgia, Brunswick stew. Georgia and Virginia have been arguing about who invented Brunswick stew since roughly 1828, and neither is going to concede, so let us just talk about the food. It started as a hunter's stew made with squirrel, and that is not folklore, that is what the earliest recipes say. Over time, it became chicken and pork, often the leftovers and scraps from a barbecue pit, simmered for hours with corn, lima beans, potatoes, onions, tomatoes, and a good deal of vinegar and black pepper. It cooks until the meat shreds into strings and the potatoes dissolve and thicken everything. The result is thick, tangy, smoky, and almost sweet from the corn. In Georgia, it is never the main event. It is what comes alongside barbecue in a styrofoam cup, made from the parts of the hog that could not be sliced and sold. That is the point of it. It was invented to make sure nothing left the pit unpaid for. Every barbecue joint made their own. Almost no household does anymore. Number 23, Florida, smoked mullet. Before Florida was condominiums, Florida was fishing villages, and the fish that fed those villages was not grouper or snapper. It was mullet, a bony, oily fish that nobody wanted, and that swam past the docks in schools so thick you could throw a cast net off a bridge and pull up dinner. Because it was oily, it took smoke better than any fish in the Gulf. Families split them, salted them heavily, and hung them in a smokehouse or a converted oil drum over smoldering buttonwood or oak for 4 or 5 hours until the flesh turned the color of a penny and the oil rose to the surface. It kept for a week without ice. You ate it with your fingers off a sheet of newspaper with saltines, hot sauce, and a raw onion, or you flaked it into a dip with mayonnaise and lemon. Cortez, Florida ran on this. A mullet was free if you had a net. Now it is a specialty item and most Floridians have never tasted it. Number 22, Alabama, white sauce chicken. In 1925, a man named Big Bob Gibson in Decatur, Alabama, did something to barbecue that should not have worked. He made a sauce out of mayonnaise. Mayonnaise, apple cider vinegar, black pepper, lemon juice, and a little sugar and salt, whisked into a thin white liquid. Then he took whole chickens that had been smoked over hickory for hours and dunked them entirely into a vat of the stuff. The heat from the bird thins the sauce so it clings in a pale coat instead of sliding off. The vinegar cuts the smoke. The fat carries the pepper into the skin. It sounds wrong on paper, and it is one of the great things in American cooking. North Alabama adopted it completely, and for decades, if you drove 20 minutes in any direction from Decatur, every backyard cook and every church chicken fundraiser used white sauce. Cross into Tennessee, and it stops dead. Most of America still thinks barbecue sauce is red and always has been. Number 21, Mississippi, Delta hot tamales. There are tamales in the Mississippi Delta, and they have been there since at least the early 1900s, and nobody can fully explain how. The best theory is that Mexican laborers came up to work the cotton fields and shared their food with black sharecroppers who were working the same rows, and something new came out of it. Delta tamales are not Mexican tamales. They are smaller, made with cornmeal instead of masa, and here is the crucial difference. Instead of being steamed, they are simmered in a pot of spiced, greasy red broth for hours, so they come out wet and heavy and swimming, and you eat them with the liquid spooned over the top. Filled with seasoned ground beef or pork, wrapped in corn shucks, sold 3 for $1 out of carts and off truck beds in Greenville and Rosedale by men who yelled the price down the street. Hot tamale stands were the closest thing the Delta had to fast food. Only a handful survive. Number 20. Louisiana Couche Couche. Every Cajun family in South Louisiana ate this, and almost none of them ever wrote it down. Couche Couche is a Cajun breakfast, and it is what you eat when you have cornmeal and nothing else. You put a heavy black iron pot on the fire with a spoonful of lard, mix cornmeal, salt, baking powder, and water into a batter and pour it in. Then you do not touch it. You let the bottom set into a hard brown crust, and only then do you start breaking it up with a spoon, stirring the crust up through the soft meal until the whole pot is a mixture of crunchy bits and steamy grains. It goes in a bowl with milk poured over it and cane syrup on top. Sometimes it went in with coffee, sometimes with leftover gravy for supper. Cornmeal cost almost nothing, and a pot of couche couche fed a family of 8 on a prairie farm in Evangeline Parish. It is a Cajun word for a food most Cajuns under 40 have never eaten. Third pattern break. Here is something worth sitting with. Almost every dish on this list solved the same 2 problems: stretch the protein and use the fat. Onions driven into a burger, rice cooked in chicken broth, cabbage folded into ground beef, cornmeal bound into pork trimmings. Bacon grease is the flavor base of an entire regional cuisine. And for about 40 years, from roughly 1975 to 2015, we were told this was the worst possible way to eat. Fat was the enemy. Organ meat was primitive. Starch was the problem. So we replaced lard with hydrogenated vegetable shortening, replaced liver with a multivitamin, and replaced a pot of beans with a diet frozen entree. Then the science shifted. A 2015 review in the British Medical Journal found no conclusive link between saturated fat and heart disease. Bone broth became a health product. Nose-to-tail eating became a movement. We are now paying $18 for things our great-grandmothers made from garbage. They were not being quaint. They were right. Number 19, Texas chicken fried steak. This is a German schnitzel that walked into Texas and never left. German and Czech immigrants settled Central Texas in the 1800s with a technique for pounding and breading veal, and Texas had no veal and plenty of beef too tough to chew. So they took a cut of round steak, ran it through a cuber or beat it flat with the edge of a plate, dredged it in flour, dipped it in egg, dredged it again, and dropped it into a skillet of hot lard. The pounding broke the connective tissue. The breading held the moisture. What came out was a piece of the cheapest beef in the store, tender enough to cut with a fork, wearing a crust like fried chicken. Then came the gravy, made in the same pan from the drippings, flour, milk, and an aggressive amount of black pepper poured over the whole plate. This fed ranch hands, roughnecks, and truck drivers for $1. It is on menus everywhere now and made from scratch almost nowhere. Number 18, New Mexico pozole. Pozole is older than the United States by a wide margin, and in New Mexico it is not a soup, it is a calendar. Dried field corn is soaked in a solution of slaked lime or wood ash, a process called nixtamalization, which causes the hulls to slip off and the kernels to bloom open like flowers when cooked. Process, which Mesoamerican cooks worked out thousands of years ago, unlocks niacin in the corn that the human body otherwise cannot absorb, and it prevented pellagra in an entire hemisphere. Nobody in a New Mexican kitchen knew the chemistry. They just knew the corn had to be treated. Then the hominy goes in a pot with pork shoulder, garlic, and dried red chili pods from a ristra hanging by the door and simmers for hours until the pork shreds and the corn is soft. It is served at Christmas, at feast days, at weddings, in bowls with lime and raw onion. This is one of the oldest living recipes on the continent, and canned hominy nearly killed it. Number 17, Arizona, the chimichanga. The chimichanga is what happens when someone drops a burrito in a fryer, and depending on which restaurant in Tucson or Phoenix you ask, that is either an accident from 1922 or an accident from 1946. The story is always the same in structure. A burrito slipped into the deep fry, the cook started to swear, caught herself because children were present, and said a nonsense word instead. That word became the name of the dish. What matters is what frying does to a burrito. The tortilla blisters and goes from soft to shattering, sealing the whole thing so the shredded beef and beans inside steam in their own moisture. Then it comes out and gets covered in red chili sauce, cheese, sour cream, and shredded lettuce until it is a knife and fork situation. It was cheap because it used leftover machaca, dried shredded beef, the cut you make when you have no refrigeration. Arizona claims it fiercely. Most of America thinks it is a chain restaurant invention. Number 16, Utah funeral potatoes. The name is not a joke, and Utah is not embarrassed about it. When someone in a Latter-day Saint ward died, the Relief Society organized the meal for the family, and this is what showed up, every time, without discussion. Frozen shredded hash browns, a can of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, melted butter, grated cheddar, and diced onion, stirred together and spread in a 9x13 pan. Then the topping, which is the entire argument. Crushed cornflakes tossed in more melted butter, or crushed potato chips, and families have been divided on this for 60 years. Bake until the top browns and the edges bubble. It cost about $3 and fed 20. But the reason it matters is not the recipe. It is that a grieving family in Utah in 1962 did not have to think about dinner because a pan appeared on the porch. That is what the dish actually is. Utah put it on a commemorative Olympic pin in 2002, and the rest of the country still does not understand. Number 15, Colorado, the Denver sandwich. Before it was an omelet on a brunch menu, it was a sandwich, and it existed for a reason that has been completely forgotten. Chopped ham, onion, and green pepper get fried together, then beaten eggs get poured over the whole pan and cooked into a flat, firm patty that gets folded or cut and dropped between two slices of bread. Now here is why it existed. The prevailing theory, and it is a good one, is that Chinese cooks working the railroad camps and mining towns of Colorado in the 1870s adapted egg foo young for Western tastes, and that the onion and pepper were there to mask ham that had gone slightly off. Eggs and onions covered a multitude of sins in a camp with no ice. It was cheap, portable, and durable. Miners carried them. Railroad crews ate them cold. It became a diner staple across America and then quietly lost the bread, becoming just another omelet nobody thinks twice about. Number 14, California, Cioppino. Cioppino was invented by Italian fishermen in San Francisco in the late 1800s, and the origin of the name is the best part. The theory is that when a boat came back short, a fisherman would walk the wharf with a pot asking the other crews to chip in, and the phrase was chip in, which came out of a Ligurian accent as Cioppino. Whatever went in the pot, went in the pot. Dungeness crab, clams, mussels, whatever rockfish had not sold, cracked shells and all, dumped into a broth of tomatoes, wine, garlic, and olive oil, and simmered until everything opened. You ate it with your hands, wearing a bib with sourdough bread to drag through the broth, and the broth was the entire point because it had every creature in the bay dissolved into it. It cost nothing because it was made of what did not sell. Now, it is a $40 entree on Fisherman's Wharf sold to tourists, and the fishermen who invented it are gone. Number 13, Oregon Marionberry Pie. The marionberry is not an old folk fruit. It was engineered in a laboratory in Corvallis, Oregon, released in 1956 by a USDA breeder named George Waldo and named after Marion County. It is a cross of a cross, bred specifically to be a better blackberry, and it worked so well that Oregon now grows almost all of them in the world. What it did to home baking in the Willamette Valley was immediate. The berry is darker, earthier, and more tart than a wild blackberry, with a little bit of a wine note to it. So a pie made with them needs almost nothing. Berries, sugar, a spoon of flour or tapioca to hold the juice, lemon, and a lard crust. That is the whole recipe because doing more would be an insult. Families picked them off roadside canes in August and put up enough filling to bake through the winter. Oregonians ate marionberry pie the way other states eat apple. Cross the Cascades and hardly anyone has heard the word. Number 12, Washington razor clam fritters. Twice a year, when the tide goes far out on the beaches of the Washington coast, entire families used to appear in the dark with lanterns, buckets, and a narrow shovel called a clam gun. Razor clams do not sit still. They burrow at a rate that makes grown men give up, so you watch for a small dimple in the sand, and you dig fast, and you commit. What you get is a long, sweet, delicate clam that tastes nothing like a quahog. Home cooks cleaned them, chopped them fine, and mixed them into a batter of flour, egg, milk, and a little onion, then dropped spoonfuls into a hot cast iron pan with bacon grease and fried them until they went brown and lacy at the edges. Lemon on top. That was dinner, and it cost nothing but a license and a cold morning. Long Beach and Copalis ran on this. The clam populations crashed and rebounded, and the crowds thinned, and the fritter went with them. Number 11, Maine bean-hole beans. This is cooking with a shovel. Loggers in the Maine woods dug a pit, lined it with rocks, and burned a hard fire in it for hours until the stones were glowing. Then they raked out the coals, dropped in a cast iron pot of soaked yellow eye or soldier beans, layered with salt pork, molasses, mustard, and onion, lidded it, and buried the entire thing under sand and coals. Then they walked away for 8 to 12 hours. Overnight. All day. It did not matter because the pit held a low, even heat that no oven can replicate. And while they worked, the beans slowly collapsed and drank the molasses and the pork fat until they turned dark brown, glossy, and almost candied at the edges. This was Saturday night across Maine, in logging camps and in town, served with brown bread and nothing else. A pound of beans cost a dime and fed a crew. It survives at a handful of bean-hole suppers and essentially nowhere else. Number 10, New Hampshire, the boiled dinner. The New England boiled dinner is the most maligned meal in America, and almost everyone maligning it has never had a good one. A piece of corned beef, or better, a smoked shoulder, goes in a big pot of water and simmers for 3 hours alone until it is tender. Then, and this is the part people get wrong, the vegetables go in by timing, not all at once. Potatoes, carrots, turnip, and beets first, because they take longest. Onions after, Cabbage wedges last for 15 minutes only, so they still have some spine. Everything cooks in the meat's broth and picks up salt and smoke. It comes out on a platter with butter and a pot of mustard. But the real dish is the next day. The leftovers get chopped and fried in a skillet with the beets, which turn everything magenta, and that is red flannel hash, and it is better than the dinner that made it. 2 meals, 1 pot, under $2. Number 9, Vermont, sugar on snow. This one is not a meal, it is a ritual, and it happened for about 3 weeks a year. In March, in Vermont, when the days go above freezing and the nights drop below, the sap runs, and the sugar house fires up. Boiling 40 gallons of sap down to 1 gallon of syrup takes all day and fills the woods with steam. And at some point during that boil, somebody takes a ladle of syrup that has been cooked slightly past syrup stage, walks outside to a snowbank or a pan of packed clean snow, and drizzles it in ribbons across the surface. It hits the cold and seizes instantly into a chewy, taffy-like rope you lift with a fork and eat off it. Then, traditionally, a sour pickle and a plain cake donut, because the sweetness is so extreme you physically need to cut it. Sugar on snow parties were how a whole town celebrated the end of winter. Syrup costs money now. Nobody has 3 weeks. It is going. Number 8, Massachusetts Boston Brown. Bread. This bread is steamed, not baked, and the reason is that early New England kitchens did not have reliable ovens, but every kitchen had a pot of boiling water. So the dough, and it is not really a dough, more of a thick batter, goes into a greased can, gets covered with foil or a tied cloth, and stands in a pot of simmering water for 2 or 3 hours. Rye flour, cornmeal, and wheat flour in thirds, molasses, buttermilk, baking soda, salt, and usually raisins. It comes out of the can as a dark, dense, moist cylinder that you slice into rounds. It is faintly sweet, deeply earthy, and it does not taste like any bread sold in a supermarket. It was made specifically to go with Saturday night baked beans, and that pairing held in New England for over 200 years. B&M sold it in a can into the modern era, which tells you exactly how central it was. Almost no one steams one at home now. Number 7, Rhode Island Johnny Cakes. Rhode Island has fought a legislative war over this. In 1899, the General Assembly debated the correct spelling. There are 2 camps in the state, Newport County and South County, and they disagree about the batter with a bitterness that outlives generations. A Johnny cake is white flint corn, ground on a stone mill, mixed with salt and boiling water into a thick paste, and dropped in spoonfuls onto a greased griddle where it fries into a crisp-edged, custard-centered cake. That is it. No egg, no leavening, no sugar. The South County version is thick and small. The Newport version is thin and lacy and made with milk. People have written letters to newspapers about this for 120 years. What matters is the corn. Narragansett Whitecap Flint is an heirloom variety that yields poorly and tastes like nothing else, and there are only a handful of mills left grinding it. The recipe is indigenous, taught to colonists in the 1600s. It is still here, barely. Number 6, Connecticut, the steamed cheeseburger. Meriden, Connecticut, and a few towns around it do something to a hamburger that the rest of the world has never accepted. There is no grill. There is a steel cabinet full of steam trays. A ball of ground beef goes into one small tray. A block of sharp cheddar goes into another tray beside it, and the door closes. Steam for 10 minutes. What happens is strange and wonderful. The beef never browns, so there is no crust and no char. And instead it stays completely gray and shockingly juicy, because nothing rendered out of it. Meanwhile, the cheddar in the other tray has melted into a liquid, and the cook scoops it and pours it over the patty in a thick, molten flood before slapping it on a hard roll with mustard and onion. It is soft, it is wet, it is genuinely delicious, and it is confined to about a 15-mile radius. Restaurants have been steaming these since the 1920s. Nobody outside Connecticut has ever heard of it. Number 5. New York, beef on weck. Everyone thinks buffalo means wings. Buffalo people will tell you the real dish is older and better. Beef on weck starts with a kummelweck roll, a German bun crusted with pretzel salt and caraway seeds, which is the entire engineering of the sandwich. Then rare roast beef, sliced paper thin, and here is what makes it. The top half of the roll gets dipped briefly into the au jus from the roast, so it goes soft and soaked, while the bottom half stays dry enough to hold. Horseradish, freshly grated, goes on in an amount that will make a grown man's eyes water. That is the entire sandwich. The salt on the roll was not there for flavor. It was there because tavern owners in the 1800s figured out that salt makes people thirsty, and thirsty people buy beer. The whole thing is a 19th century marketing scheme that produced a perfect sandwich. Wings went worldwide. Beef on weck never left Western New York. Number 4. New Jersey pork roll. The state cannot even agree on the name. In North Jersey, it is Taylor ham. In South Jersey, it is pork roll. People have argued about this on the record, in newspapers, in the state legislature for a century. What it is a processed, cured, smoky pork product invented by John Taylor in Trenton in 1856, sold in a cloth-wrapped cylinder. And it is not ham, and it is not bologna, and it does not taste like either. You slice it a 1/4 inch thick, and then you make 3 or 4 cuts from the edge toward the center, because otherwise it curls up into a bowl in the pan. Those cuts have a name. The pork roll turns dark at the edges and blisters, and it goes on a hard roll with a fried egg, American cheese, salt, pepper, and ketchup. That sandwich for $1 out of a diner window at 6 in the morning fed New Jersey for 150 years. Cross the Delaware, and it does not exist. Number 3. Pennsylvania chicken and waffles. This is not the southern dish. This is the older one, and almost nobody knows it exists anymore. Pennsylvania Dutch chicken and waffles has no fried chicken in it at all. What it is a stewing hen simmered for hours with onion and celery until the meat falls off the bone and the broth turns golden. That broth gets thickened into a rich, pale gravy, and the pulled chicken goes back in. Then you make waffles. Plain, savory, cornmeal-heavy waffles with almost no sugar, cooked in a heavy iron on the stovetop. And you ladle the creamed chicken and gravy over the top until the waffle is drowned. That is it. Farm families across Lancaster County ate this every Sunday and served it at every church supper and firehouse fundraiser in the county. It existed because an old hen was worthless and a waffle was flour and eggs, and together they made a hen feed 15 people. It was on Pennsylvania tables 100 years before the Harlem version. It has been almost entirely erased. Number 2. Delaware chicken and slippery dumplings. Delaware is small enough that it should not get its own food, and it got one anyway, and this is it. Slippery dumplings are not the fluffy, dropped kind. They are the opposite. You make a stiff dough of flour, water, and a little fat. Roll it out flat on a floured table until it is thin as a shirt, and cut it into squares with a knife, about 2 inches across. Then you drop those squares into a pot of simmering chicken broth, where they do not puff and they do not float. They swell slightly, go slick and soft and heavy, and the flour on their surfaces dissolves and thickens the broth into something like gravy. Pulled chicken goes back in with black pepper. It comes out looking like nothing. It is beige, wet, and honestly unattractive. And it is the taste of every church supper and volunteer fire company fundraiser in Sussex County for a century, made from a hen and a bowl of flour, feeding 20 people for $4. Number 1, Maryland fried chicken with milk gravy. At the top of this list is a dish so plain that naming it feels almost like an anticlimax, and that is exactly why it belongs here. Fried chicken, everybody has that. But Maryland did something specific to it that no other state did, and the rest of the country decided it was wrong. Here is the difference. Maryland fried chicken is not fried and served. It is fried in a skillet in an inch of lard, then the fat is poured off and cream or milk is added straight into the pan. The lid goes on and the chicken finishes braising in its own gravy for another 20 minutes. The crust does not stay crisp. It goes soft and it dissolves partway into the milk, and the milk turns into a thick, speckled, salty gravy that comes to the table poured over the bird and the mashed potatoes both. Escoffier, the greatest chef in Europe, put Maryland fried chicken in his book in 1903, which tells you something about how far its reputation reached. The reason it existed was economics, like everything else on this list. A hen too old to lay was too tough to simply fry. But fry it and then braise it in milk, and the acid and the moisture and the low, steady heat break down the connective tissue in a way that pure frying never will. The tough bird becomes tender. The wasted crust becomes gravy. Nothing is thrown away, and the flour, the fat, and the milk that carried the flavor all end up on the plate instead of in the pan. And then America decided that fried chicken had to be crisp, that gravy was old-fashioned, that a hen was worth less than the shortcut, and it went. Restaurants that had served it for 100 years dropped it. Grandmothers who made it every Sunday died, and their daughters had jobs, and a bucket was $3, and who could blame them? This dish is what almost every food on this list is. Not a recipe, but a solution. A way to take the cheapest possible ingredient and, with time and technique and no money at all, put something on a table that made a family feel taken care of. 50 states, 50 solutions, and we forgot nearly all of them within a single generation. Here is my challenge. Find your state on this list and make it this week, just the one. Then tell me in the comments whether your grandmother made it or whether you had never heard of it, because I want to know which state lost the most. These were not just recipes. They were how a place fed itself, and someone in your family knew.